So, you want to play Age of Ashes. Hello and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Today's video is another video player's guide, this time for Age of Ashes, the first adventure path ever produced under the Pathfinder 2e rule set. For those unfamiliar with my player's guides, this video will provide a brief overview of the structure and themes of the campaign, while remaining light on spoilers. I'll provide a rundown of the setting and the lore leading up to the campaign, then dig into some mechanical options players can select to have a thematic connection to the story, including ancestries, classes, and religious options. The end of this video will be me laying out the changes I would suggest GMs make to this AP. Before I go any further, I should also lay out my sources for this video. If you're planning to run or play Age of Ashes, you'll need access to all 6 books in the adventure path, as well as the official player's guide, which is available for free online. Link in the description. Beyond these primary resources, you might also want access to the Lost Omens World Guide as a primer on the Inner Sea region of Golarion, as well as the Lost Omens Draconic Codex as the source of truth for all things dragon-related in the setting. Draconic lore and world travel play a major role in this campaign, so having these resources could be tremendously helpful, as we will discuss. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. Or, if you want to support the channel directly, check out my Patreon. Just $2 a month gets you access to all my scripts, as well as the audio files for all of my scripted videos, all of which drop at least a week early. With that out of the way, let's start with the campaign overview. Age of Ashes is a 6-part adventure path, taking player characters all the way from level 1 to level 20. It is the very first AP ever produced for the Pathfinder 2e system, having debuted well before Paizo walked back the 6-book structure and 1 to 20 level plan they had pursued at the beginning of the edition. It covers books 145 through 150 in the Adventure Path product line. As usual, the official player's guide for this campaign has been published online for free by Paizo, and is available at the link in the video description. Book 1 of Age of Ashes begins in a small town in central Avestan, but the AP quickly shifts gears to focus on world travel. For that reason, no one location acts as the primary focus for the entirety of the AP. Instead, the Inner Sea region as a whole is explored across all 6 books, from northern and central Garund to the 5 Kings Mountains of Avestan. This theme of world travel is one of the core narrative pillars of the adventure path, and players should craft characters willing to go along with that idea. I really like the meta-narrative going on in Age of Ashes. As the first AP in 2e, Age of Ashes is structured like a tour of some of the most interesting places and cultures in the Inner Sea region, a showcase of some of the things which make the Lost Omens setting a cool place to run games. This was a smart business decision, and I think the narrative does a passable job of making this tour feel internally justified. That being said, there is a small amount of tension between this theme and the idea of the PCs starting out as small-town heroes and community defenders. The AP kicks off, as many Paizo APs do, with the heroes defending and setting up shop in a small town. This narrative idea definitely runs the risk of being in serious tension with the world travel aspect of the story, but I think the campaign as written manages to thread the needle, assuming the players don't go in expecting to be entirely focused on one of those 2 ideas. The thread which connects these 2 ideas is the unraveling of a large-scale criminal conspiracy. By uncovering the clues of this plot, then following up on them to see where they lead, the PCs will travel to a variety of locations. The last building block of the narrative for Age of Ashes is probably the most exciting. Dragons. Age of Ashes features draconic lore as one of its central hooks. That said, the number of dragons which players will actually fight isn't particularly high. Dragons as an idea are far more relevant to the story than draconic encounters in and of themselves. Mechanically, there isn't really a unifying theme explored in this AP. Age of Ashes throws a little bit of everything at the players, from single combat encounters and straightforward dungeon crawls to social encounters, traps, and environmental hazards. The AP definitely leans harder into combat than exploration or roleplay, but it's not an all-out slugfest. There is, however, one recurring mechanical challenge which players will face which is entirely unintentional: wonky game balance. Being the first 2E AP, Age of Ashes has some famously insane encounter balance, or maybe I should say lack of balance. Many people have addressed these issues online, and I'll be discussing it at the end of this video, but if your GM doesn't do anything to rebalance a few fights in each book, then the players will semi-regularly run into situations which are horribly unbalanced. Again, this is not intentional, but it is worth mentioning. So, with that high-level review of the AP in place, let's dig a little deeper. What exactly are we doing in Age of Ashes? Age of Ashes follows a fairly straightforward and simple gameplay loop. The PCs arrive at a location, usually following up on a lead they previously discovered. They meet some new potential allies, then discover that those new acquaintances are fighting enemies who are related to the clue that the heroes were already pursuing. The PCs then undermine the regional elements of the broader conspiracy, aiding their new allies in their efforts and discovering a new clue toward the larger conspiracy in the process. Rinse and repeat. Of course, each book in the AP has variations on this loop, and this base description is only accurate in a very broad sense, so don't think that this framing will give you all the answers to each book's internal plot. Players should keep this gameplay loop in mind when designing their characters. Effective players and characters for this AP should be self-motivated to seek out things to do, without needing excessive GM prompting. PCs in Age of Ashes will be most effective if they are the types of characters willing to stand up to evil in all its forms. At the same time, they shouldn't be especially antisocial or suspicious of strangers. At least one or more party members should be quick to make friends, and willing to engage with strangers from a variety of cultures without much in the way of preamble. If the players are resistant to this idea, I might suggest considering a different AP. Now, I know I've talked about the idea of world travel and location hopping a lot, but where does this loop begin? Where do the heroes start out in Age of Ashes? The AP kicks off in the little town of Breachill, a settlement of about 1,300 residents in the shadow of the Five Kings Mountains in Isgir. Situated about a mile south of the former Hell Knight fortress Citadel Alterain, Breachill is a community supported largely by resource harvesting, in the forms of farming, logging, and hunting, though a number of other industries, including brickmaking and stonemasonry, exist within the settlement as well. Breachill is a town with a mysterious history, which I'll discuss in detail in a moment. But at the start of the campaign, the most relevant aspect of the city is the Call for Heroes. The Call for Heroes is a monthly meeting called by the town council, in which residents of the town can bring concerns to their government and petition them for aid in the form of hired adventurers. These adventurers are paid directly by the city government, with the locals believing that keeping vetted and experienced adventurers effectively on retainer is worth the expense, since it frees up the city watch and gives townspeople a last resort when they are in desperate need. So this is the setup for Age of Ashes. The PCs are low-level adventurers, hoping to pick up gameful employment in Breachill by attending the Call for Heroes. This meeting will involve the presentation of problems by local residents, at which point attending heroes will be able to present themselves and make the case that they are worthy of the job. Bear in mind, if the player characters don't already know each other, that's totally fine. The Breachill Town Council is more than willing to hire individual adventurers and put them into adventuring parties. With the basic framework for the campaign now understood, let's shift gears a bit and discuss mechanics. Age of Ashes relies heavily on combat to tell its story, and I give the author team a lot of credit for creating combat scenarios which, for the most part, feel varied throughout the entire run of the AP. Humanoids fill out much of the roster for enemy creatures in this AP, but the type of humanoids constantly changes. Outside of the humanoids, the AP also makes use of a wide variety of creatures, from giants to hags to undead and beyond. Overall, I quite liked the creature variety in this AP, but that does mean that characters built to specialize against specific enemy types would struggle in the campaign. The AP also makes frequent use of what I will refer to as complex encounters. These are combat encounters which involve additional non-enemy challenges, like hazards or secondary goals like rescuing NPCs. The campaign features at least 13 of these encounters throughout its run by my count. I gotta say, I really like these, and I would like to see more of them brought back in Paizo's APs in the future. Broadly speaking, much of the combat in this AP takes place outside of traditional dungeons, but 8 dungeon crawls do exist throughout the AP. These vary in length from rather short to 20-plus rooms. While this is far from a dungeon-delving AP like Abomination Vaults, there's still plenty of dungeon exploration for those who like it. Beyond conventional combat, the AP employs several exploration, downtime, social, and infiltration challenges. For those familiar with the more recent Paizo APs, you'll see the bones of the influence and infiltration systems. Due to how early in the 2E system this AP debuted, the author team presumably had limited exposure to the finalized Victory Point subsystems. For that reason, Victory Point challenges play a very limited role in the AP, and those which do show up are not presented in the same format as later APs. For some groups, this might be a bit jarring, but I know there's been a lot of pushback against Paizo over the past 2 years for an over-reliance on these systems, so just as many groups might find this departure somewhat refreshing. Lastly, I need to address one unique subsystem in this AP. One aspect of Age of Ashes, which sets it apart, is the inclusion of a base building mechanic. I won't get into narrative spoilers, but essentially, at some point, the characters will gain access to a location which can serve as a home base, which can then be expanded upon or customized with a series of downtime activities. As written, however, this mechanic can leave a little bit to be desired, at least if my read-through of the book and my assessment of the Pathfinder subreddit is anything to go on. I've got a few suggested modifications in my GM section of the video for how this idea might be improved upon, but that should be viewed by prospective GMs only. Outside of combat, a number of skills could be particularly beneficial for parties running through Age of Ashes. While it's generally a good idea to cover all skills with a party, these are the skills which, based on the listed skill checks for plot progression in the AP, will be the most consistently useful. Of the 5 core knowledge skills, the 2 most important will be Arcana and Religion, as both will come up consistently in all 6 books of the AP. Occultism and Society are the next most important, with Nature being the least important of the 5. Again, though, try to cover all of them if you can. The 4 social skills will all have moments to shine, but diplomacy is definitely the most relevant to the story, which shouldn't be a surprise given the gameplay loop I described earlier, involving the regular meeting of new friends and allies. Intimidation, deception, and performance are all about equal to one another, but all fall below diplomacy in terms of relevance. Of the skills more themed around exploration, thievery is probably the most relevant, both due to the number of occurrences and the level of importance of those occurrences. It's definitely worth having a thievery expert around to unlock doors and disarm traps. Athletics is great for dealing with hazards and climbing, while survival will aid in tracking and other environmental navigation. Medicine, meanwhile, will keep the party alive in an AP full of dangerous encounters. Lastly, crafting has plenty of opportunities to shine in this AP, due in part to the base building mechanic I discussed earlier. The level of downtime available for longer-term crafting projects should be reasonably high in the campaign as written, but be sure to talk to your GM and see if they're planning to modify the timeline to be more fast-paced. If, for instance, your GM wants to hand-wave away the base building or eliminate it entirely, there will likely be far less downtime available for crafting. Taking a look at the lore skills which shine in this AP, the most important lore skills are those focusing on the ancestries which are featured prominently in the campaign. Elf lore and dwarf lore are the most relevant, but halfling and gnome lore have moments to shine as well. Aside from these, 3 other lore skills come up somewhat regularly: Breachill lore, dragon lore, and a lore skill focused on a specific malevolent deity, which I won't spoil here. Once you find it, you'll know. Of course, a wide variety of additional niche lore skills have situational use, from alcohol and cooking to games and legal lore. Before I close out this overview, I also want to address the topic of languages. Due to the vast distances traveled by the PCs in this campaign, the party could benefit from knowing a wide variety of languages. The ancestral languages, Elvish and Dwarven, are important, and Gnomish and Halfling might be useful at a few points as well. Jotun, the language of the giants, comes up on occasion, and the Kellish regional human language is really important around the midpoint of the story. Also, while not technically a requirement, Mwangi, the regional common language in the Mwangi Expanse, could be a good thematic choice, though it might be hard to justify into the backstory of an Avestan-based player character. History and lore. The story of Breachill begins quite suddenly in 4520 AR, less than 200 years ago at the time of the campaign. In the autumn of that year, 50 humans awoke in a threadbare trading outpost in a valley near the Five Kings Mountains. And when I say awoke, I mean that in the literal sense. The 50 humans began their day in this trading post with no memories of how they got there, where they were, or even what their former lives had been. All of them were afflicted with amnesia. While these lost souls retained some basic communication and societal skills like language and writing, they had little in the way of survival skills, and their trading outpost was poorly provisioned and offered little in the way of shelter. As winter approached, the settlers had no hope of surviving, and their outlook was grim. Then, against all odds, a miracle arrived in the form of a traveler. Lord Lamond Breachton was an accomplished wizard and adventurer, and as he made his way south from a lucrative business venture in Druma, he stumbled upon the trading outpost and its doomed inhabitants. Lord Breachton decided then and there to help those poor souls, and spent the next year, as well as a considerable portion of his recently acquired fortune, building up a community. He took the settlers to the nearby Breach Creek, where he constructed for them a series of dwellings. He purchased enough food to help the town survive the winter, then brought in industrial experts from the surrounding lands to teach the settlers how to farm, how to fish, how to hunt, and all manner of other crafts which would sustain a town. Eventually, the little community of humans became self-sufficient, and they began referring to their new town as Breachton's Hill, a name which was eventually shortened to just Breach Hill for convenience. Lord Lamond Breachton himself is, despite his importance to the town's history, a mysterious figure. His personal history is entirely unknown, as he never spoke about it with anyone during his time in the town. No one even knows where he acquired the title of Lord, or where his ancestral lands were. His appearance is well known, due in large part to a statue which remains in the town to this day. He wore his white hair long, and dressed himself in extravagant flowing robes. Though he was merely human, with no celestial or elvish blood in his veins, a point which he clarified numerous times, the irises of his eyes were distinctly gold in color. Not brown or tan, but truly gold. His voice, too, was clear and deep, and rang out in a way described at the time as angelic. Breachton was notable for the parental outlook he had toward the peoples of Breach Hill. He treated the residents of the new town as children in need of instruction, even if those particular residents were older than him. This attitude might have come off as insufferable or patronizing, but the wizard's helpful and generous contributions to the town's survival managed to stave off such accusations. Lord Lamond Breachton vanished without a trace from the town in the fall of 4521. No one knows what happened to him, and no one has ever found any trace of the kindly man in any other nation in the Inner Sea region. For the next century or so, the little town of Breach Hill grew steadily. As the original group of 50 humans settled down and had children, their descendants were joined by new arrivals from the surrounding lands, including dwarves from the nearby Five Kings Mountains, and Ayuvarin, Dromar, gnomes, and even a few goblins from all over central Avestan. As Breachill grew, it developed a reputation as being a welcoming way station for travelers, with the locals eager for stories of adventure. This fed into the development of the Call for Heroes, which I discussed earlier, the monthly meeting during which the town council hires heroes to deal with local problems. The town also developed a reputation for peace and security, a rarity in eastern Isgir, where dangers and lawlessness were common. This reputation soon drew the attention of the Hell Knights, a mercenary order of warriors dedicated to the preservation of law and order. In 4638 AR, the Hell Knight Order of the Nail took a particular interest in Breachill. The Order of the Nail had been founded on the principle of opposing chaos and disorder on the frontiers of so-called civilization, and in Breachill they saw an ideal community to protect. The Order of the Nail selected a small hill about a mile northeast of Breachill, and there they constructed their first fortress, a single-tower compound which they dubbed Citadel Alterain. For the next 4 years, Breachill benefited from the presence of the fortress, as the town became the supply depot for the entire Order of the Nail. More industry and wealth was drawn to the town than ever before, and the population continued to grow. In 4682 AR, however, the situation in Breachill changed. Queen Domina Arabasti of Corvosa lured the Order of the Nail to her city with an offer to construct them a bigger and better fortress. As many of the Nail Knights, as I like to call them, left Citadel Alterain for Varissia, only a small stay-behind force occupied the castle. This ultimately reduced the industrial activity in Breachill, but by that time the town had become largely self-sustaining. Even the eventual abandonment of Citadel Alterain in 4711 by the Order of the Nail didn't prevent life in Breachill from carrying on like normal. In the years since, the fortress has remained largely empty. The locals believe that the fortress is best left alone, lest any meddling stir up trouble. It has played host to a number of itinerant groups over the years, mostly benevolent or neutral parties with little interest in interacting with Breachill's populace. Currently, a tribe of goblins called the Bumblebrashers make their home within the structure, and they have a good working relationship with the townsfolk. Breachill Today. As of 4719 AR, the town of Breachill is a small but relatively prosperous town of about 1,300 residents. It is arranged along the shores of Breach Creek, a waterway which provides a shipping lane to the rest of Isgir, and 4 bridges connect the eastern and western sides of the town. The Crimson Tide Wood borders the town to the south, providing local loggers with timber to harvest, and local hunters with game to stalk. Of the town's 1,300 residents, the majority are human, and while many of the immigrants to the town were of mixed Taldan and Varissian descent, the original 50 settlers were of ethnicities found all across Avestan and beyond. Over the years, small groups of dwarves moved to the town from the nearby Five Kings Mountains. Elves and Ayuvarin emigrated to the town in small numbers, as did Dromar. Gnomes, halflings, and even a few goblins settled in over the years as well, giving Breachill a decidedly diverse feel despite its small size. Despite their differences, the citizens of Breachill are generally unified in their broad sense of community and industriousness. The culture of Breachill is one of hard work and welcome. Strangers are generally greeted with quick smiles and open arms, so long as they carry their own weight and treat others with respect. Both these communal features trace their roots all the way back to the town's founding, when the first 50 settlers needed to work hard to survive, and needed to accept the help of outsiders in the form of Lord Breachton and his hired experts. Still, the hard-working nature of the townsfolk doesn't preclude them from rest and relaxation. Multiple taverns dot the town, and many of Breachill's citizens take a work-hard, play-hard approach to life. Breachill is governed by a town council, which is made up of 5 elected representatives who serve 2-year terms. The town council is in charge of all civic matters, from infrastructure maintenance to taxation. They also manage the town watch. Most importantly for this AP, the Town Council manages the monthly Call for Heroes, which is what draws the player characters to the town in the first place. The current members of the Town Council are as follows. Council President Greta Gardania is a good-natured and well-read politician with a passion for Breach Hill's history. She's descended from several of the town's original human settlers. Yorsk Hinterclaw is a retired dwarven adventurer from the Five Kings Mountains. He completed several jobs in and around Breach Hill prior to settling into a quieter life, earning him the goodwill of many. Quentino Passandi might not be descended from one of the founding families, but he is the owner of the Passandi Brothers Masonry Company, one of the most respected businesses in town. Despite his quiet demeanor, his opinions are respected. Melba Ann Sendari's family fled to Breach Hill more than 70 years ago, at the conclusion of the Chelish Civil War. Though born and raised in town, she still carries the noble bearing of her ancestors. Finally, the gnome Trini Spritzelgig was brought to Breach Hill as a baby, when her parents fled Cheliax. Of all the council members, she's known for her helpfulness, and is the most willing to invite visiting adventurers to work for the town. I should also mention the Ayuvaran Wilford Lavendil. He is the leader of the Town Watch, an organization of 50 warriors trained to defend the town and maintain the peace. Though not a council member, he is a prominent public servant. At the very center of Breach Hill is the Monument Circle, something of a town square. 6 freshwater wells surround the circle, providing clean drinking water for the town. At the center of the circle stands a 15-foot statue of Lord Lamond Breachton, the founder of the town and the savior of the original 50 settlers. Town Hall is situated just south of Monument Circle, and it's here that the Town Council holds meetings. Immediately adjacent to the Town Hall are the Breach Hill Archives, the repository of all official records relating to the town. The collection of documents began with Lord Breachton himself, who was an intense documentarian regarding his work on the town. The current proprietor, the Dromar Jorel Blacktusk, continues with this tradition, and venerates Breachton as a personal idol. While many of the documents within the structure are dry in nature, think purchase records, crime reports, and construction records for Citadel All-Terrain, the archives also house the personal accounts and recollections of the townsfolk. These records are far more subjective in nature, containing anecdotes and treasured memories from residents as far back as the founding. The intense work ethic of the townsfolk, which I mentioned earlier, might explain the variety of industries which have taken root in Breach Hill since its founding. 3 taverns have sprung up in town, and all are well attended. Caden's Keg, located on the town's main thoroughfare, is popular with adventurers. It serves as a temple to Caden Kalian, one of the most popular deities in town, and the priestess Bryn Taith is known to encourage adventurers to share stories of their adventures. On the north end of town, the Pickled Ear appeals to a rougher crowd. Brawls are a common affair, and the Town Watch is known to keep a close eye on the Pickled Ear most nights. On the south side of town, by contrast, the Wizard's Grace Tavern appeals to a more well-spoken and respectful crowd. This establishment is frequented by members of the Town Council, especially leading up to the Call for Heroes, when adventurers are known to stop by and try to win over one or more council members. 2 other temples feature prominently in the town. Shellin's Smile is the name given to the Temple to the Eternal Rose, located along Breach Creek. This facility serves double duty as the headquarters of the town's artisan guild. Though there's no official high priest, the most prominent member of both the clergy and the guild is likely Tarandlara Valendel. Across the river, the Great Dream House is the official temple to Desna, the 3rd prominent deity in the city. Of the 3 temples in town, this one is the most temple-like in appearance. It also serves as a bunkhouse for travelers from all walks of life. The structure even features an observatory, which High Priest Kellen Carundil opens to the public so they might see the beauty in the stars. 2 companies in town employ more citizens than any others. On the southern edge of town, Breach Creek Lumber frequently sends lumberjack parties into the nearby Crimson Tide Wood to feed the town's constant need for lumber as buildings are constructed or repaired. Expeditions into the wood can be very dangerous due to the local fauna, so the company is known to hire adventurers regularly to accompany and protect its workers. Passandy Brothers Masonry is located on the shores of Breach Creek and has been in business for generations. All the employees of the company are relatives of the Passandy family, and their business practices are something about which they are tremendously secretive. The Passandy family is facing competition, however, from the Tuskhead Stoneworking Company, founded just across the river in the last 10 years by the dwarf Rorsk Axebane. Of particular note to adventurers might be two more businesses, Quarters and Bits and the Reliant Book Company. Quarters and Bits is actually two businesses, a blacksmith shop, the Quarters, and a general store, the Bits. Both are managed by the gnome Crink Twindleton, who specializes in outfitting low-level adventurers and employs more than a few talented craftsmen to do so. The Reliant Book Company is very much a specialty business. It deals in rare books, especially history texts and personal diaries. The business is known to attract scholars from outside of town. Several other businesses exist within the town, including the clother Crimson Wood Furs and the Wainwright Vuskers Carts and Wheels. But that about covers the major features of Breachill, which new arrivals might have learned from gossip on the road or some basic research in nearby towns. Options for player characters. Alright, now it's time to discuss some player-facing topics you can use to help build your characters for Age of Ashes. Because Age of Ashes is structured as a tour of the many locations in the Inner Sea region of Galarian, it manages to feature NPCs belonging to a wide variety of ancestries. Most of the ancestries in the player core feature prominently in at least small sections of the AP, with the exception of orcs and leshies, who unfortunately don't get much attention. Elves and elven history hold a place of prominence throughout the AP, and are featured heavily in one of the early books in the story. Given that the AP starts in central Avestan, the Iudine elves, or Iudine-descended Ayuvarin, are definitely worth consideration. Dwarves, and especially Five Kings Mountain dwarves, are only slightly less prominent in the story, and are featured heavily in one book in the back half of the campaign. Goblins and gnomes are both featured in the front half of the campaign, and halflings have some prominence in the back half, though none of them get quite as much attention as elves and dwarves. If you're really feeling compelled to play a human, I would suggest playing a human of the Taldan or Chelish ethnicities, since they are the dominant ethnic group in the region where the campaign begins. If you do want to play someone more well-traveled, consider someone with personal ancestral ties to Katapesh, Osirian, or Kadira. Because of the relevance of dragons to Age of Ashes, I might also suggest the Draconic Kobold or the new Dragonet as potential options. The new lore surrounding kobolds makes clear that they serve a wide variety of powerful forces beyond just dragons, but plenty of kobolds still choose to live in symbiosis with draconic protectors, meaning they might connect with the dragon-related elements of the story. At the same time, the new Dragonet ancestry has the same connection to the theme of dragons, while bringing a lot of fun new versatility to the table. Looking beyond just ancestries, the Dragonblood versatile heritage could express this same mechanical connection to dragons. Plus, it's just really cool. Moving on to the classes players might consider for their characters, I'll start off with the combat-focused martials. Naturally, in a campaign featuring plenty of combat, the fighter and guardian will excel at offense and defense respectively, though neither will bring any inherent out-of-combat versatility to the party. The ranger, and especially the precision or flurry ranger, will serve the party well on the front lines, but could also easily cover survival and medicine. The champion will be tremendously effective, as their sanctification will have plenty of evil targets to trigger extra damage. Of the champion causes, liberation is the most thematic, and there are a number of narratively appropriate deities to consider. The Dragon Instinct Barbarian is a great choice, both because of the power it presents and its connection to dragonkind. The same could be said of monks with the dragon-style line of feats. Lastly, I want to highlight the Swashbuckler as a fantastic option, since every subclass they have covers one of the important skills in this AP. Now looking at the skill-focused martials, the Rogue is probably the best choice overall, since it is such a flexible class both in and out of combat. The investigator is similar, and the unraveling of the conspiracy at the heart of the campaign, especially in the back half, could provide an investigator with plenty of leads to pursue. That said, I think I like the rogue just a little bit better than the investigator here, since the combat elements of the campaign are more prominent than the non-combat elements. The alchemist could be a great option, but as usual, I don't recommend the toxicologist, since poisons still aren't tremendously effective. Thaumaturges are rock solid overall, and most implements could work well in this AP. Lastly, the commander could be useful in parties of 5 or more characters, but won't have many non-combat opportunities for warfare lore to stand out in a meaningful way. Moving on to the spellcasters, the sorcerer is a fantastic choice here, and the draconic and wyrm-blessed bloodlines are the standout options. For the wizard, the elf-related school of the Gate is definitely the most thematic arcane school. Similarly, the Unbound Step Psychic is thematically appropriate in much the same way. The cleric is rock solid as an option so long as you pick a thematic deity, and all 3 doctrines, Cloistered, Warpriest, and Battle Harbinger, are good choices. While the Oracle isn't my personal favorite class, the Lore Oracle could be great, especially with its ability to pick up situational lore proficiencies. For the same reason, the Enigma Muse Bard is a solid choice too, though the Maestro Muse will be better in combat, and the Polymath Muse will be great at covering the face skills. Finally, the Kineticist is just a pretty great and fun class, and the combat-heavy nature of this campaign makes it a good fit. The only advice I would give to Kineticists is to make sure you branch out into multiple damage types, even if only by taking the Versatile Blasts feat. Taking a look at the archetypes, which might be especially thematic or effective for this AP, a few stand out. The Linguist and Loremaster could both be great for covering the languages and lore skills the party will need throughout the AP. The Archaeologist, meanwhile, will help disable traps if you don't have a rogue or investigator in the party. The Scout could help to cover exploration activities in a party without a rogue or ranger, and the Dandy could help cover face skills in a party without a bard, rogue, or swashbuckler. Last, but certainly not least, the new Draconic Acolyte will tie any character to the idea of dragons and dragonkind. Changing focus a bit, a number of deities could be fantastic options for PCs to worship in this AP. Within the starting town of Breachill, 3 deities, well suited to adventuring, are popular: Desna, Shellen, and Cadencalion. Desna is the goddess of luck, travel, and the night, and is great for the themes of travel in this campaign. Shellen is less thematic as the goddess of art, love, and beauty, but she's still extraordinarily popular among adventurers. Cadencalion is the god of drink and freedom, and his followers are eager adventurers who are excited to stand up against the forces of evil. Outside of these 3 local deities, most good aligned deities who don't prohibit adventuring could work well. Iomide, goddess of chivalry, is a great option for more dogmatic characters, and characters devoted to her might have an interesting interaction with a faction in the first parts of the story. The Soverian Conclave, the ancestral pantheon of the Iodine Elves, is a rich thematic choice, and among the member deities, the gods Alceta, Ketiphys, and Yulral are especially interesting in this story. Similarly, the ancestral dwarven pantheon, Stone's Blood, is a great option, though the individual dwarven deities Torag and Angrad are solid on their own as well. The halfling deity, Chaldira Zuzaristan, is an absolutely fabulous choice for her opposition to tyranny and enslavement. And finally, the dragon god Apsu, patriarch of the Draconic Pantheon, is one of the best choices for the entire campaign. Apsu is traditionally somewhat distant, but the themes of this AP are sure to draw the attention of his relatively few followers. Now I'll take a look at the many unique campaign backgrounds available in Age of Ashes. Unlike most Paizo APs, Age of Ashes presents players with a whopping 9 unique backgrounds to choose from for their characters. The Dragon Scholar background represents characters who have a fascination with all things draconic. You might have some mechanical or ancestral connection to dragons, or might simply find them endlessly interesting. You've studied the might and majesty of the dragons for years, and some of their confidence and innate sense of power has rubbed off on you. In addition to being trained in intimidation and dragon lore, you gain the Intimidating Glare skill feat. The emancipated background represents characters who were once slaves in the Chilaxian Duchy of Ravenel. You were freed from your bondage when Ravenel gained independence during the events of the Hell's Rebels adventure path, and have since become an adventurer. Since leaving Ravenel behind, you've used your ability to pass unnoticed by others, hoping to avoid Chelish slavers. In addition to being trained in the stealth skill and Kintargo lore, you gain the Terrain Stalker skill feat. The Haunting Vision background represents characters who've been haunted for years by visions of fire and burning destruction. Your most recent vision showed you the town of Breachill specifically, and you've traveled there to investigate. You've also recently learned of Dayhawk, the draconic destroyer god, and for various reasons you can't quite explain, you feel a connection between his faith and your visions. In addition to being trained in religion and Dayhawk lore, you gain the Student of the Canon skill feat. The Hell Knight Historian background represents characters fascinated with the Hell Knights, the law-bound warriors scattered across southwestern Avestan. You might love them, hate them, or just find them interesting, but you know more about them than most. You are especially interested in Citadel Alterain, the abandoned fortress outside of Breachill, which, according to rumors, is up for the taking to whomever can find the lost deed. In addition to being trained in society and architecture lore, you gain the Courtly Graces skill feat. The Local Scion background represents characters who were born and raised in Breachill. You belong to a family of longtime residents of the town, and are excited to observe the annual Call for Heroes. Due to your familial connections, you've likely apprenticed in some trade practiced in the town. Familial legacy is likely a substantial motivator for you. In addition to being trained in crafting and Breachill lore, you gain the Specialty Crafting skill feat. The Out-of-Towner background represents characters from outside of Breachill, who are first-time visitors to the town. You spent a substantial amount of time living with members of a non-human ancestry, and are well-versed in their traditions and history. Your reasons for coming to Breachill are not dictated by this background, so feel free to work something out with your GM or fellow players. In addition to being trained in diplomacy and gaining the Hobnobber skill feat, you are trained in one lore skill associated with a non-human ancestry from the following list: Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Goblin, or Halfling. The Reputation Seeker background represents characters who are from Breachill, but who are not driven by the idea of family legacy. The history of people finding fame and fortune in and around Breachill has motivated you to become an adventurer, though your initial foray into the wilderness was short-lived. You are trained in the survival skill, as well as your choice of Darklands, Desert, or Jungle lore. You also gain the Terrain Expertise skill in the terrain which matches your chosen lore skill. The Returning Descendant background represents characters who've recently discovered that one of their ancestors was a resident of Breachill, who became an adventurer during the Call for Heroes. You yourself have never lived in Breachill, and your hard life of infiltration and thievery has motivated you to try and follow in your ancestors' footsteps. In addition to being trained in thievery and engineering lore, you gain the Pickpocket skill feat. Finally, the Truth Seeker background represents characters who are intrigued by the mysterious past of Breachill. Perhaps the long-lost Lamond Breachton was not what he appeared to be, or perhaps there was some nefarious magic which led to the establishment of the town even before Lamond arrived. To navigate the complex history of the town, you've practiced untangling the various conflicting narratives you are likely to uncover. In addition to being trained in deception and politics lore, you gain the Lie to Me skill feat. My Party. Now, just like I've done in some previous Player's Guide videos, I want to close out this discussion on character creation with a sample party of 5 characters which I would produce for this AP. These characters will lean into my own personal tastes and my strong desire for thematic connection to the AP material and interpersonal interaction. This is as much a mental exercise for me as a tool for inspiration for you, the audience. This party consists of 5 characters, all of whom come from a wide variety of ancestral backgrounds. Up first is Mora Marigold. Mora is a halfling who was born into the chattel slavery system in Cheliax. She grew up exposed to the cruelties of Chelish domination, and became a devout follower of Chaldira, the halfling goddess of mischief and freedom. Before she could engage in any acts of rebellion, however, she was freed from her bondage by the revolution in the Duchy of Ravenel. She finished her childhood as a free citizen in Kintargo, but her need to take action against tyranny still smolders within her heart. She set out as an adventurer once she reached adulthood, determined to put her varied skills to good use in the world. Mora is a scoundrel rogue, who focuses on using her social skills and dirty tricks in combat to keep her opponents off balance. She has the emancipated background. In a free archetype game, she takes feats from the scout, archaeologist, or swashbuckler archetypes. Next is Gareth Breacher, a human warrior and religious scholar seeking his place in the world. Gareth is a dragon-blooded human from northern Taldor. The origins of his draconic ancestral connection are not entirely clear to him, but he knows that his powers descend from an oath dragon specifically. His draconic connection has led him to the relatively obscure faith of Apsu, the draconic patriarch. Since his youth, Gareth has been plagued by visions of fiery destruction, and only after discovering the faith of Apsu did he learn that these were associated with the dark draconic god Dayhawk. His most recent vision depicted the small town of Breachill in Isgur, and he set out for the little town to determine how he might intervene to prevent its destruction. Gareth is a battle harbinger cleric of Apsu, with the haunting visions background. He uses his staff and his draconic abilities to support allies from the front lines. In a free archetype game, he would take feats from the Draconic Acolyte archetype. Up next is Grunhilda Steelskull. Grunhilda, called Grunny by her friends, is a dwarf maiden from the Five Kings Mountains of central Avestan. Raised in the faith of the Stone's Blood dwarven pantheon, her faith was shaken during a Duergar raid on her settlement. From then on, she embraced the more aggressive faith of Angrad, the dwarven war god. She trained relentlessly in the art of combat, becoming an accomplished warrior. She set out from her home in an attempt to further hone her craft, arriving in Breachill with the goal of taking up the call for heroes. Grunhilda is a fighter specializing in heavy armor and the great axe. Her fighting style is simplistic: shove and slam enemies to the ground before caving in their skulls with her axe. She has the out-of-towner background. In a free archetype game, she would take feats from the Medic or Blessed One archetypes, augmenting her combat abilities with healing skills. Next is Briseliath Livenia, a young elf from Kionin. Briseliath, sometimes called Bressi, grew up among the Iudine elves of Kionin, and never knew her father had come from Breachill. Her innate magical talent drew her to a career as a wizard, specializing in her Kionin-based School of the Gate. During her studies, she grew to favor the goddess Alceta, though she still reveres the Sovirian Conclave as a whole. Since discovering her father's mysterious origins, she's become obsessed with unraveling the oddities in his past. While he isn't willing to talk much about his past, he's supportive of her line of inquiry. Briseliath is a wizard with the Staff Nexus thesis, who focuses on the School of the Gate. She has the returning descendant background. In a free archetype game, she would take feats from the Loremaster and Linguist archetypes. Last but not least is Gobadias Gunn, an energetic gnome. Gunn is a talented scholar, but his particular method of staving off the dreaded bleaching is to work as a field researcher. He carries multiple large packs on his person at all times, each of which is stuffed with notebooks, atlases, and almanacs. Rather than following a god of knowledge, Gunn instead reveres Desna, the goddess of travel, and Caden Kalian, the god of drink and adventuring. He sees them as ideals to live up to, for what is the purpose of knowledge if it cannot be put to use in exploring the world, helping others, and spreading joy? Gunn is a lore mystery oracle, who relies on his charm to weasel information out of even unwilling interview subjects. He has the truth-seeker background. In a free archetype game, he would take feats from the Dandy archetype. Within this party, Mora serves as the emotional core and driving force. Her unquestioned devotion to good and her unbridled enthusiasm help to keep her team unified in support of her, even when her short-sightedness gets her into trouble. She's supported in her general opposition to tyranny by Gareth, who is aligned with her benevolence, but serves to temper her enthusiasm with a degree of level-headedness. Gareth largely gets along with Grunhilda, since they are both relatively level-headed and devoted to fighting evil. Grunhilda, however, is stern, stoic, and no-nonsense, meaning Gareth often needs to act as a mediator between her and Mora. Bressi and Gunn serve as two sides of the same coin, both serving as scholars in the party. Where Brasiliath serves as the analytical academic, focusing on books and records, Gunn contrasts her by focusing on social interaction as a means of research. Gunn's hyperactivity and need to engage directly with events puts him in alignment with Mora's more direct and confrontational methods. Bressi, meanwhile, is more cautious, putting her in closer alignment with Gareth and Grunhilda. GM Advice, or How Might I Run This? Warning: the following section is intended for GMs only. If you're planning to play in this adventure path, I suggest stopping this video now, or skipping ahead to the outro. I'll need to discuss some spoilers to properly address my suggested adjustments to this adventure. You have been warned. Alright, well, one major advantage of discussing a campaign which has been out for a while is that a lot of cleanup work has already been performed by the community. For that reason, this section is quite a bit shorter than in my previous campaign video. I'm going to be leveraging the expertise of others here, since no amount of work I do would surpass their efforts. In addition to the two specific resources I mentioned after this, I also suggest checking out the Paizo blog, and specifically the section relating to Age of Ashes, for any more unaddressed issues. There's been a lot of discussion over there about this campaign. First up, user Calnix over on the Pathfinder 2e subreddit created a 14-page guide to fixing Age of Ashes. This incredibly extensive and useful guide goes through the whole AP book by book. It focuses a lot of time on rebalancing the problem encounters which feature throughout the AP's length, rebalancing them to be more appropriately challenging. Calrix also makes several suggestions about dungeon layouts, which could be tweaked, and also highlights several plot points which GMs should keep in mind at various points throughout the campaign. I really can't recommend this resource enough as a GM, since so much of the basic corrective work has already been done for you. You'll still need to keep your eyes open for potential problems throughout the AP, but this takes a huge weight off your shoulders. Bear in mind, this guide was written with the idea that the GM has already read the whole AP before they read the guide. I've linked this document in the description. The second major existing resource I suggest GMs consider for Age of Ashes is the Stronghold Rules Rework from Reddit user Russischer Czar. This document, which is beautifully presented by the way, completely reworks the base building rules which the players can use to improve and customize Citadel Alterain. The rules presented in the book can get pretty granular, but also feel a bit restrictive. Russischer Czar made some major edits by choosing to break work time on the castle into week-long periods, then mixed in some elements of the studying system as seen in the Strength of Thousands AP. The result is a system which feels easier to run while also being more expansive. I really like this system, and it seemed like a no-brainer to run this instead of the original rules. Again, I've linked the document in the description of the video. Looking at my own suggestions for this AP, the biggest thing I would change is to simply update the 3 major dragons in the storyline to better fit the post-remaster Pathfinder dragons. Each of Pathfinder's new dragons presents some fabulous new abilities to make combat more exciting, so this should be fairly rewarding. First up, Kyrian, the young red dragon in Book 3, should be updated to a young cinder dragon. While Kyrian's involvement in combat is limited in this book, cinder dragons have a new Stoke the Flames ability. This allows them to spend an action to intensify any persistent fire damage affecting enemies around them. For this reason, I suggest making some modifications to the encounter featuring Kyrian, adding elements like additional mooks, barrels of oil, and torches to allow Kyrian to use this ability in a meaningful way. Next, in Book 4, the players face off against Vishumarix, a unique magma dragon. Magma dragons already exist in the remastered rules, so you don't need to make a ton of edits. I do, however, want to highlight two abilities which are new. Magma Tomb is an ability which allows the dragon to hurl a glob of lava at a target. If the target fails their save, they can become trapped within the cooling lava as it solidifies, running the risk of becoming immobilized. Also, magma dragons in the new rules can cast the Breathe Fire spell at will. It's a simple ability, but I like it. Lastly, and most importantly, Menkare is no longer a gold dragon, but a vizier dragon. Vizier dragons are occult dragons who take immense pride in guiding along a chosen protege. In this case, Menkare's chosen proteges are the many citizens of Promise, which makes him an oddity among his kind. If the party manages to negotiate with Menkare without resorting to violence, then you don't really need to change much. If combat does break out, however, a Vizier Dragon is poorly suited to solo combat. They're designed to support other characters as a sort of battlefield commander. For this reason, I suggest providing Menkare with some variant of the Promise Guards as an elite force of bodyguards. If you're concerned about him being unwilling to allow mortal guards into the presence of PCs who might reveal his secrets, you could accomplish the same effect with some kind of construct. Either way, give him some additional forces to command, or most of his abilities are going to feel useless. Well, if you still want to play the Age of Ashes adventure path, that should be enough information to get you started. I strongly encourage you to read the player's guide which Paizo has put together. Again, it's totally free, and I've linked it below. This AP certainly has its pain points from a mechanical standpoint, but I really like what Paizo did with the Inner Sea Tour aspect of the campaign. All things considered, it's a pretty strong start for the 2E adventure paths. Later this month, I'll be covering the draconic deities Apsu and Dayhawk, the two most famous and influential dragon gods. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.